The first snowfall of winter had blanketed the city in a cold, unrelenting stillness. I'd spent the evening sketching by candlelight, the glow casting flickering shadows across my small studio apartment. The hum of the heater was the only sound, and I welcomed the solitude, craving distance from the world outside. New Year's Eve was just a day away, but for me, it would pass like any other, alone, with charcoal-streaked fingers and a glass of cheap wine. When the knock came, I startled so violently that the glass tipped, spilling crimson across the worn wood of my desk. My heart thudded as I wiped my hands on my apron and cautiously approached the door. Who would visit me at this hour? I opened it to find no one. The hallway was empty, the single flickering bulb overhead making the scene feel surreal. Then I noticed the envelope on the ground, a deep red wax seal glinting like a droplet of blood. I hesitated before picking it up. It was heavier than expected, its thick parchment smelling faintly of aged perfume and smoke. My name, Evelyn Gray, was scrawled on the front in an elegant, looping hand I didn't recognize. Inside was an invitation. You are cordially invited to the masquerade ball of the century. December 31st, 10 p.m. Willowmere Estate, Edgewood. No RSVP, no sender, just directions written in the same flowing script. I should have thrown it away, dismissed it as some prank, but something about the invitation made my pulse quicken. Willowmere Estate. I'd heard of it, a sprawling Gothic manor that sat abandoned for decades at the edge of town. The locals whispered tales of its last owners, of lavish parties that ended in tragedy, of masked guests who vanished without a trace. A shiver ran down my spine as I flipped the card over. That's when I saw the mask. It was lying on the doorstep, nestled in a shallow box lined with black velvet. The mask was unlike anything I'd ever seen, its glossy black surface reflecting the dim hallway light like liquid ink. Intricate carvings of vines and feathers twisted along its edges, too detailed, too alive, as though they'd been etched by an impossibly steady hand. It should have repelled me. Instead, I felt my fingers trace its delicate edges, captivated by its craftsmanship. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt a faint pull in my chest, like the mask was calling to me, and despite my better judgment, I found myself whispering, "I'll go." The night of the ball was bitterly cold, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I wrapped myself in an old black coat and took a cab to the edge of town, the mask nestled in a small bag at my side. The road to Willowmere Estate was winding and desolate, lined with towering pines that blocked the moonlight. As the cab drew closer, the estate came into view, looming like a phantom against the starless sky. Its dark spires pierced the heavens, its many windows lit with an eerie golden glow. The gravel crunching under the tires was the only sound as the cab pulled up to the grand iron gates. They stood open, inviting, though they seemed more like the gaping maw of a beast than a welcome. "You sure about this?" the cab driver asked, his voice uneasy. I nodded, my hand clutching the mask. "Yes, I won't be long." He didn't offer a reply, just muttered something under his breath and drove off, leaving me to face the estate alone. The walk up the long driveway felt endless, the estate's glow drawing closer yet somehow staying distant, like a mirage. My footsteps faltered when I reached the massive front doors, their polished black wood carved with strange, writhing shapes. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the mask from the bag and slipped it over my face. It fit perfectly, its weight strangely comforting, like it belonged to me all along. The doors creaked open the moment the mask settled against my skin, revealing a world of opulence inside. The grand foyer was breathtaking, gilded chandeliers dripping with crystals, polished marble floors that gleamed like water, and masked figures in resplendent gowns and suits gliding across the room like phantoms. A string quartet played a haunting melody from the corner, the music curling through the air like smoke. I couldn't help but notice how the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling my head, pushing out my thoughts. I moved through the room, drawn to the crowd and yet apart from it. Everywhere I turned, I caught the glint of eyes behind masks, their gazes lingering on me for a beat too long. Their laughter was soft but hollow, as if forced through gritted teeth. The unease began to creep in when I noticed the carvings on their masks. They were similar to mine, intricate, organic, but subtly wrong. I could swear the vines on one man's mask twisted when I wasn't looking. The feathers on a woman's flickered like real flame. I tried to shake off the growing dread, blaming it on the strangeness of the setting. But as I reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray, the mask tightened around my face, just slightly, enough to make my breath hitch. Then, for the briefest moment, I caught my reflection in one of the towering mirrors lining the ballroom walls. It wasn't my face staring back. It was something darker, twisted, and it smiled. I stumbled away from the mirror, my pulse hammering as though my heart was trying to escape my chest. It wasn't my face. I'd seen it clearly. The thing staring back at me had hollow eyes, black pits where my irises should have been, and a mouth stretched into a grin that didn't belong on a living face. Around me, the ballroom swirled with music and movement, oblivious to the creeping panic clawing at my throat. My breaths came shallow and quick as I reached up to yank the mask from my face, but my fingers froze halfway. A voice whispered, "Don't." The words slithered into my ears, low and melodic, yet carrying an undeniable command. I spun around, searching for the source, but the revelers glided past me, their laughter hollow and mechanical. No one had spoken to me. "Don't take it off," the voice repeated. It wasn't external. I realized that now. It was inside my head, a sound that vibrated against the base of my skull. I backed into a corner of the room, trying to steady myself, but the voice grew stronger, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. "You belong to me now." The mask tightened again, and a sharp, hot pain stabbed at my temples, as if invisible thorns were burrowing into my skin. My reflection in the mirror shimmered at the edges, the twisted version of my face grinning wider, its teeth sharper. "Are you all right, my dear?" I flinched at the voice, this one real and tangible. A man stood before me, his mask golden and ornate, the eyes behind it unnervingly sharp. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator approaching its prey. "Yes," I stammered, forcing my trembling hands to my sides, "just overwhelmed." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The mask has that effect. His gaze drifted to the mask I wore, lingering. A striking piece, rare, but perhaps a little too heavy for someone unaccustomed. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. His smile widened, revealing teeth too white, too perfect. "You'll find out. By midnight, everything will be clear." The clock above the ballroom chimed softly, marking the hour. 11. The man bowed slightly and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me shivering. My head buzzed with questions, but the mask's voice cut through my thoughts like a razor. "Stay. The hour is close." The carvings on the mask seemed to ripple, their edges glowing faintly in the dim light. I felt my limbs moving without my consent, guiding me back into the center of the ballroom. The music swelled. The masked figures formed a slow, synchronized dance, their movements impossibly smooth. I found myself drawn into their orbit, unable to resist the pull. My legs carried me forward, weaving between the other dancers, though my mind screamed to stop. As I spun through the crowd, I caught glimpses of the dancers' masks. The carvings had grown more pronounced, shifting and curling like living things. One mask's feathers flared outward like molten metal, its wearer's face barely visible beneath the writhing shapes. Another mask seemed to bleed, crimson rivulets trickling down the chin of the figure who wore it. The voice in my head grew louder, more insistent. "Dance, Evelyn. Midnight approaches. You will know your purpose." The clock struck the half-hour. As the final minutes of the year ticked away, the ballroom seemed to change. The golden light from the chandeliers dimmed, casting the room into a sepulchral gloom. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, their jagged edges creeping across the marble floor like claws. I broke from the crowd, desperate to escape the oppressive pull of the music. My skin prickled as I pushed past masked figures who turned to watch me with empty, glinting eyes. The whispering in my head had grown into a chorus, 100 voices chanting in unison. "Midnight is near. Fulfill your role." My legs felt leaden, my body weighed down as if the mask itself was growing heavier. I stumbled to the edge of the room, collapsing against one of the towering mirrors. But the reflection wasn't mine. The creature in the glass grinned at me, its face a grotesque parody of my own. The mask on its face had fused with its flesh, the carving spreading like veins across its skin. Its eyes glowed faintly, cold and alien. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The creature tilted its head, and its lips moved in perfect sync with mine. "You are me, and I am you." "No," I said, shaking my head. My voice cracked. "You're not real." The reflection's grin widened, and suddenly it reached forward. The glass rippled like water as its hand emerged, its long, clawed fingers brushing against my shoulder. I screamed, stumbling backward. The ballroom fell silent, the music cutting off as abruptly as if a knife had sliced through it. Every masked figure turned toward me in unison. "Midnight," the man in the golden mask announced, his voice echoing through the room. The clock began its final countdown, the chimes ringing out heavy and mournful. Dong! The crowd parted, forming a perfect circle around me. I tried to move, but my body betrayed me, standing still as though rooted to the spot. Dong! The carvings on the masks flared with light, illuminating the room in a sickly glow. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of smoke and decay. Dong! The masked figures began to chant, their voices a low, guttural drone. The words were foreign, harsh and grating, yet they resonated in my chest as if I'd always known them. Dong! The mask tightened again, the pain unbearable now. Tears streamed down my face as the carvings dug deeper into my skin, pulsing in time with the chimes. Dong! Fulfill the pact, the golden masked man intoned, stepping forward. His voice was calm, almost reverent. Let the mask claim you. The whispers in my head reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices that drowned out my thoughts. My vision blurred, and I felt my body moving against my will, stepping toward the fire pit at the room's center. Dong! I caught a glimpse of the mirror again. My reflection was gone. Only the creature remained, watching me with hunger in its eyes. And then the final chime rang out, its echo rippling through the ballroom like a death knell. The mask whispered one last command. Surrender. The final chime reverberated through the ballroom, long and mournful, each wave of sound pulling the room deeper into shadow. The golden masked man stood before me, his presence towering, his movements as fluid and unnatural as the light that flickered across his face. The other figures encircled us, their masks writhing with life, the carvings now unmistakably organic, veins, sinew, and bone fused into the grotesque ornaments that had once been mere accessories. The mask on my face grew impossibly tight. The pain became a living thing, burrowing into my skull, sending sharp, hot tendrils down my neck. My body felt no longer mine, my limbs responding to a will that wasn't my own. My hands reached out toward the fire pit at the room's center, trembling with effort as I tried to pull them back. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to obey. But the mask's voice filled my head, now one with the chant of the masked crowd. Release. Become complete. The flames in the pit flared, unnatural and green, casting flickering shadows on the grand mirrors lining the walls. As the crowd chanted louder, their voices rising in a terrible crescendo, the mirrors changed. They no longer reflected the ballroom or the dancers. Instead, they showed endless darkness, a void teeming with grotesque shapes that slithered and shifted in impossible ways. Eyes blinked open in the shadows. Hundreds of them, all watching, waiting. I tried to scream, but the mask constricted further, cutting off my breath. The golden masked man stepped closer, his gaze piercing through the eye slits of his mask. His voice rang out, smooth as silk, yet vibrating with an unholy timbre. You are the vessel, the chosen. Tonight, the mask will cross the veil. Through you. The crowd erupted into frenzied applause, their movements becoming more erratic, their laughter distorted and inhuman. The air turned heavy with the scent of burnt flesh and rotting flowers. Desperation clawed at my chest. Through the blinding pain, I searched the room, my gaze falling on the nearest mirror. The creature, my twisted doppelganger, stood within the glass, watching with a hunger that made my stomach churn. Its mouth moved, echoing my words, but with a cruel, mocking edge. You cannot stop this! My reflection, the thing stepped forward, pressing its clawed hand against the glass. The surface rippled like water as it began to emerge, its form solidifying as it stepped into the ballroom. Its grin split its face impossibly wide, and its voice came not from its mouth, but from everywhere at once. It is time. The mask on my face grew unbearably hot, searing into my flesh. The fire pit roared higher, the green flames licking at the air like a living entity. The crowd moved closer, their masks fusing with their faces, their bodies twitching in grotesque, jerking motions. And then I saw him. Daniel, the historian from earlier, his face pale, his mask cracked and hanging loosely from one side of his face. His eyes met mine, wide with terror, and he mouthed a single word. Fight. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I clawed at the mask, the pain almost blinding as my nails tore into its edges. The voice in my head screamed in fury, but I ignored it, digging deeper, feeling the wet heat of blood running down my cheeks. The golden-masked man lunged toward me, but Daniel moved first, tackling him to the ground. Their struggle disappeared into the chaos as I wrenched the mask free with a final desperate scream. The room exploded in light. The mask hit the fire, its intricate carvings writhing as the flames consumed it. The creature, halfway through the mirror, let out a shriek that shattered the remaining glass, its form flickering and crumbling like ash caught in a whirlwind. The crowd collapsed, their masks falling away to reveal pale, sweat-soaked faces. The flames dimmed, the heavy air lifting as the ballroom returned to its former splendor, silent, still, and empty. I stood trembling, clutching my bloodied face as Daniel staggered to his feet, his mask lying broken on the floor. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his expression one of awe and relief. You did it, he rasped. You stopped it. But as we turned toward the remnants of the mask in the dying fire, my blood ran cold. The flames sputtered out, leaving behind only ash and embers. Yet for a fleeting moment, I saw the carvings move, the faintest trace of a smile curling within the blackened remains. And in the distant mirrors, cracks spread like veins, the void beyond them still watching. The ballroom was silent, but in the back of my mind, I could still hear the faintest whisper. Until next time.